said, Nick, I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate the invite, man. Looking forward to it.
So, I mean, Nick Gut Health is your name. So anybody that follows you obviously has some general idea that's what you're about. That's what you focus on. But before we get into like the actual specifics of gut health, I'm curious. I'm very fascinated by stories and where people come from, how they get to where they are. So, question to you out of the gate is how'd you get to where you are from where you were being however far back you want to go?
Yeah, I think like most people on health Twitter, especially, got into this whole world just because of going through my own issues myself. I guess, kind of like way back, like as a kid, I was always interested, played sports, like always interested in health, fitness. I think when I first started my Twitter account, I was into like all the OG lifting, like AJAC and like all those accounts. So I'd always had an interest in that. But I, when I got to like probably early 20s, I started to realize like these symptoms that I had always dealt with my whole life, I just kind of like assumed they're a part of living a normal life. Like I'd get bloated, I'd have headaches, I'd get brain fog, like all kinds of issues, but it wasn't like debilitating or anything. So I never took it serious. Got to my early 20s and those just got like way worse. It was like I was in college, so I'd go out and drink and I would have hangovers that were like 4 days long. My friends were recovering quickly, and I was like, all right, I started to realize like something's not right here. I didn't really take it too serious even then. Went throughout college, graduated, got a job, was working pretty stressful job, like long hours, not exactly the healthiest lifestyle. And one day it just like all came crashing down. I had probably the most intense pain I've ever had in my life in my stomach, like bloating. It looked like something was sticking out of my stomach. So I got home from work that night and I was like, okay, this is, I thought it was like an appendix. I didn't know anything about that, but I thought like this sounds like what an appendix rupture would be. So I went to the emergency room, ran all kinds of testing, like CT scans and everything, found out I had ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune disease, mainly affects your gastrointestinal tract, but like affects all kinds of things. So that started to make sense. Like I had joint pain and like body aches and brain fog and stuff like that. Never put it together that it was because of gut health. And when I got that diagnosis, it was kind of like a light bulb moment. Like everything kind of started to make sense. But yeah, that's where it all started. When I was diagnosed with that, I tried to go the traditional route with doctors and dietitians and, what most people do when they get diagnosed with something like that. And it was like 3 years of just no improvement. I was going nowhere. I was reliant on medication and supplements. So that's why I started digging into Twitter and researching and looking at like medical studies and just trying to figure out like how do I get this under control. And that's what introduced me to this whole world of gut health.
So the pain was that bad one night that you said I got to go. Like it was bad enough for you to go to the emergency room. You were like something seriously wrong.
Yeah, it was. So at that time, my diet, I mean, I wasn't eating like loads of processed foods or anything, but I was eating like tubs of nuts every day at work. I was drinking coffee on an empty stomach, like all of these things that once you get diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, you're told don't even think about it. So it was like one day at work, I was eating, I had nuts, I had like broccoli and something else that set that off. And it got to the point like I had those symptoms before, but this was like next level, like intense pain. So I kind of put up with it throughout the day. But when I got home from work, it was like so bad I couldn't even like think about laying down and going to sleep. So I was like, okay, this is not this is not normal. I need to go to the emergency room.
Yeah, wake up call in the truest sense. What was the first thing? I mean, obviously, it sounds like it was a couple year journey, but like, what was the first thing that you implemented outside of the traditional route that like was on your own accord that really started making a difference?
Yeah, the first like big change I made was a carnivore diet. So my doctor's always like low FODMAP diets and specific carbohydrate diet. There was all these recommendations, but none of those really helped me at all. And I started seeing on Twitter people posting about not necessarily just this condition. There were people with ulcerative colitis who were talking about carnivore, but like arthritis and all of these other autoimmune conditions saying they were just eating meat and they were feeling so much better. And so at that point, like I said, it was like 3 years of not seeing improvements. I was like, okay, really don't have anything to lose here. And I gave that a try. It took me a while because like when I brought it up to my doctor, really anybody, if you tell them like I'm just going to eat meat and nothing else, you're going to say you're crazy. But yeah, I finally like got over that hump and just gave it a try, and I saw so much improvement literally just from that change alone. It was crazy.
Yeah, I know Brett from the Meat Mafia. I don't know if you've met him or familiar with him. He had a similar thing where he had ulcerative colitis and went carnivore, and his symptoms like overnight almost changed for him, which is cool to hear. There's so much. The gut is like so. What's the word? There's so much to dive into. There's so much importance there. But the first thing I want to ask is like, why does that diet seem to work? Why does because I mean that's basically just another form of elimination diet, just cutting things out of your overall food consumption. Why does an elimination diet work for gut health in many cases?
Yeah, I think there's obviously like subjectivity to it, but in my case, it was just I had so many issues going on. It wasn't just the ulcerative colitis, but all of these underlying issues. So when I would eat foods like broccoli was something I ate all the time. When I would eat these like super fibrous, harder to digest foods, it would just like my body just couldn't process it. So it would just end up like kind of rotting in there, and eventually led to like bacterial overgrowth and a lot of other issues I dealt with. But for most people, I think it's just because you're cutting out, whatever it is. It's carbohydrates, it's fiber, it's, processed foods. You're just simplifying it because meat, depending on how you cook it and what type of meat it is, it's easier to digest in those situations than like a super fibrous vegetable or grains or something like that. So I think it's a really good place to start, is like cutting out those trigger foods, simplifying things, and then starting to kind of like build back from there, or starting to address those issues and then starting to reintroduce foods. I think that's why so many people see improvement from that.
And obviously, as you mentioned, there's subjectivity, individuality, and different things probably inflame or cause more harm for different people. But is there any food groups or food types that you like across the board see being an underlying cause?
Yeah, I think like just kind of generally like any processed food, a lot of people, even if it's like the healthier versions of processed foods, there's all kinds of like additives or preservatives, like anti-caking agents and stuff that go into there. Those cause a lot of problems for people. So I think really just processed foods in general. Gluten is another one. Even if you're not like celiac, I think a lot of people still react to gluten because it's just the like crops those products are coming from are genetically modified. They're blasted with glyphosate. So that seems to be one that people struggle with a lot. And then nuts and seeds. That was like I was eating so many like cans of nuts and seeds on a weekly basis, and that the anti nutrients in there, also like the omega 6 omega 3 ratio was probably contributing a lot to the inflammation that I was having. I think those are probably the main ones. There's like depending on the actual issue you're dealing with, some people just like can't tolerate carbs in general, whether it's like fruit or vegetables or bread, whatever it is. But I think the main ones are like grains, nuts and seeds, gluten, and really just like any processed foods.
Are you familiar with Dr. Bill Schindler? He wrote Eat Like a Human.
Yeah.
So I had him on the
Yeah.
podcast, and he was talking about how his whole philosophy pretty much centers around the idea of it's not necessarily what we eat, it's how we eat it, with the caveat of like there are some foods it doesn't matter, like processed foods, it doesn't really matter how you eat most processed foods, it's going to be pretty bad. But like for example, bread is what we talked about, because sourdough, even people with celiac can still eat high quality sourdough a lot of the time because of the long fermentation and what that does to the gluten and stuff like that. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of like how you prepare food as it relates to your gut health? Another example would be like yogurt or even raw milk. Some people that are lactose intolerant can consume raw dairy. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's I forgot. He posts all the time about like sourdough. I think him and his family are always making sourdough
Oh yeah.
bread. Yeah, he kind of introduced me. Like I had heard of it before. He's the one that like really got me into that for that reason. But yeah, I totally agree. I think the way I kind of think about it is like what you're saying, like from a preparation perspective or just how the food's made. So if it's pasteurized versus raw, that's going to significantly affect like the nutritional profile of it. It's going to affect how your body digests it. And then like fermented food. So it's like with dairy, going off that example again, if you have just like a glass of milk, you might not digest that as well as like yogurt or kefir that's fermented. There's less lactose in there. I think that's a huge, like an important point that a lot of people just don't really think of. They have some milk and they assume like, okay, I'm lactose intolerant, so they just don't have any dairy products at all. The other thing is how you consume it. Like you were saying, I think a lot of people, I used to be like the worst with this, is you sit down to eat a meal and you're like in the middle of working, you're watching something or like you're typing emails, you're like always doing other things while you eat, scrolling on your phone, whatever it is. Your stress levels are higher, your body's just, you're not in a state where your body's ready to fully digest food, get the nutrients out of that. So I think that's a big one too. Something I started doing like a couple of years ago is just trying to eat, even if it's just outside on the balcony, like trying to be in sunlight, stepping away from my computer, from my phone, just focusing on like this is what I'm doing. I'm eating. I'm not scrolling. I'm not doing other things. I think that's important as well, and it helps with your digestion, absorption of nutrients, and all of that.
That's interesting, man. I've actually never heard of or thought about it in that way because one thing I do know, or at least correct me if I'm wrong, but like digesting food is one of the most energy consumptive things. Like it's very energy. It taxes our energy, and so I've never thought about like when you're doing other things while you're eating food, it's probably signaling a bunch of different stuff to your brain that causes that digestion to be hampered in a lot of ways. Is that something that you've actually seen like tangible results in terms of like since
Yeah,
you decided to really focus on eating?
yeah. I so like stress and anxiety was something I really struggled with. I think it was like a huge factor with a lot of the issues I had. So I got into this habit of like doing deep breathing throughout the day or meditation or like going for a quick walk, like things like that. And I started like the deeper I dug into that, I started like the deeper I dug into gut health in general, I started to realize like a lot of times when I sit down to eat, I'm stressed out and you have like sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system. You hear like rest and digest mode versus like the fight or flight mode. And it just like started to click for me. I'm doing all these things that are like causing stress while I'm eating. My body's probably not going to be in that rest and digest mode. So I started doing like deep breathing, meditation, or I would just like, go for a quick walk outside before I sit down and eat. I noticed like, I mean, it wasn't like crazy, crazy, crazy improvements immediately just from that, but I definitely noticed I was digesting food better. At the time, I would have like bloating or um, like reflux after I would eat certain meals. And when I started doing those things, just relaxing before I actually sat down to eat, I did start to notice a lot of those symptoms were not as bad as they were before. It didn't like fully resolve them, but it definitely made a difference.
Yeah, something I think that's so interesting to hear because something I think about. I've never thought about with food, but you think about like the four main things that we have to do to live is drink water, breathe, eat, and like move. And those are often the four things that we kind of gloss over as human beings. It's like we don't care about our water. We eat while we're doing, like you said, like watching TV or answering emails. We listen to music or don't focus when we're moving or working out. It's so interesting how those become the things that we gloss over and then we focus on like our job or like the emails that you're talking about. It's just interesting how somehow that's become the norm when in reality those are the things that we should probably focus on the most. You mentioned something though, walking before meals. I know walking after is a pretty common thing in terms of digestive uh, affecting the digestion positively. How important is that? Like, is that something that everybody should be doing in your opinion?
Yeah, it's not just. I think what like there is. I know there's like studies and stuff that show it can help with blood sugar regulation. Just in like movement in general, I think it's helpful because when you like something I talk about too is doing like yoga or stretching. When you're engaging like these muscles, the organs that are involved in your digestion, kind of stimulates and helps get things moving there. So I do that. I do it before more for like the mental like relaxation side of things, and then afterwards, like I don't do this all the time now, but when I was really struggling with digestion, I would do like simple yoga poses or like stretching and just kind of like engage things and help get things moving along in there. That was another thing I noticed, especially with reflux. I had really bad reflux, and doing like stretches or yoga poses and things like that before and after helped kind of engage those muscles.
What exactly is reflux?
Like indigestion. So there's a bunch of different things that can cause it. Usually, when you start to feel like that burning sensation, it could be after meals, it could be in between meals, whenever it is. That's a lot of times when people go on like proton pump inhibitors because of that, like that burning sensation. Most people, and it could be caused by this, but most people think it's because you have like too much stomach acid. You get that like acidity feeling in your throat. A lot of times, what it is though is muscle dysfunction. So, like your diaphragm or these muscles that are involved in your breathing and your swallowing. If you have dysfunction with those, it can allow that acid to go back up into your esophagus. Or if you have like bacterial overgrowth, for example, and there's pressure built up in your stomach, that can push that acid back up into your esophagus as well. So you get that like burning reflux sensation. I had that. I was dealing with bacterial overgrowth when I had that, so it was likely just the gases from that like pushing up the acidity up into my throat.
Bacterial overgrowth, is that literally like, obviously we have certain amount of bacteria in our stomach, in our guts, that are good. And forgive me, I'm not very well versed in gut health, but is that literally just like is it as simple as it sounds? It's just an overgrowth of that bacteria that then backs things up and causes problems?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things they can cause, but yeah, you're right. So there's like literally trillions of different microorganisms in your gut, and so it's this delicate balance between there's like probiotic microorganisms that provide benefits. They help digest food, produce like short chain fatty acids and things like that. There's some that like they aren't really good, they're not really bad, they're just kind of there, and they play a role in your normal gut health. And then there's like pathogenic. So think about things like E. coli or like staph and strep and stuff like that. Those, when they get to higher levels than they should be, that kind of causes an imbalance. So it makes it harder for those beneficial bacteria to survive. You get this imbalance, you have too much of the bad bacteria. So it can cause like, there's a lot of things they can cause, but that it like buildup of pressure, like especially if you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. One of the ways they test for that is the gases that are produced by those bacteria. So that's one of the effects of it. But like inflammation prevents you from digesting your foods fully. It affects like nutrient absorption. There's all kinds of issues that come from that.
And when you say inflammation, is that specifically in the gut or the intestines as well, or like the whole tract?
Yeah, throughout like the whole tract. I mean, I guess it kind of depends. Like most, when you do like a stool test, it's looking at your microbiome like in your colon. That's where the majority of these microorganisms are. They're not really supposed to be in the small intestine. So, like when you hear of SIBO, that's bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine versus the large intestine where most of your microbiome is. But yeah, it can cause like inflammation throughout the digestive tract, like in your intestines, in your stomach, even up into the esophagus, depending on if you're dealing with like reflux and stuff like that. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. All these things you think, and this is going through these issues is where I started to realize like how interconnected the body is. Because I have this autoimmune disease that affects mainly my colon, but it's also affecting my esophagus. It was affecting like I would get pain in my eyes and like an aching in my eyes, which
Wow.
was from that as well. Because you're like 70% of your immune system is in your gut. So when you have issues there, when you have inflammation there, that can cause like systemic inflammation that can affect so many different areas of your body.
Yeah, you mentioned the word brain fog earlier as one of the symptoms, and it kind of leads to like the overarching principle of I think Hippocrates said it, something about all health starts with the gut or something. Isn't there a quote like that?
Yeah, all disease begins in the gut.
Yeah, so you think about that. You say a symptom is brain fog, and then you're thinking, okay, well, this guy's talking about gut health. It's like almost counterintuitive to think that they're related, but as you know, at a much deeper level than I do, like the gut dictates so many things. How is it possible for something that's going on in your gut to affect your cognitive abilities. That to me, it's like almost hard to even comprehend that.
Yeah, that's a huge problem too. Is like I was saying before, when I had these symptoms, I didn't really connect any of them, like brain fog, for example. But yeah, there's like you've maybe also heard of people refer to the gut as like the second brain because there is so many of these connections with your immune system through the vagus nerve, like directly to the brain. So there's like constant communication between your gut and your brain. There's neurotransmitters that are produced in the gut. There's so many different links there, but yeah, I think like I had dealt with brain fog for years, like for such a long time, even before I really started to notice these like deeper digestive issues. And I never connected those. But once I got diagnosed, once I started focusing on these things, it was like I flipped a switch. Like this is what it feels like to actually think clearly and have normal brain function again. Just literally because I was addressing those gut issues.
That's wild to think like that after you take certain steps, especially like the ones that you take in your own hands, which is I think is the common theme, especially on health Twitter, as you mentioned. Like most people that get into it, it's something that they had or were dealing with that modern or conventional medicine wasn't fixing. So then they had to take things into their own hand, and I can just imagine you sitting there being like, "Wow, this is actually what it feels like to think clearly," and then being like, "I've been waiting however many years for this to happen."
Yeah.
What's one thing that like, or I mean, I guess there's probably several, but what's like one thing that stands out to you that most people get wrong or are like or think about in the wrong way regarding gut? Is there anything that stands out?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what I was saying before, not taking into account. So like if you have issues in the gut, it can cause issues outside of the gut, like the brain fog and stuff like that. But I think a lot of times people just look, and this isn't just digestive health, this would be like health in general. If you have elbow pain, you're just going to be focusing on like your elbow, what's wrong with my elbow. If you have gut pain, you're just going to be thinking about what's going on in my gut. But there's so many connections, there's so many areas outside of the gut that could be leading to these issues. So like for me, when I started getting testing done, I didn't have like a autoimmune disease with my thyroid or anything like that, but some of the metrics for my thyroid health were a little bit off from what would be considered like normal. Liver is another one that has a pretty direct impact on that. Your pancreas, like producing enzymes, or your gallbladder. There's so many different things outside of gut health that either cause or contribute to or like a downstream effect of gut issues. So when people have like SIBO, for example, we were talking about before, they have bacterial overgrowth, they take antibiotics or they take natural antimicrobials, whatever it is, to get rid of those, but they don't think about anything outside of that. So if it's like a enzyme deficiency that's contributing to that SIBO, they go through and address the bacteria, but they don't take into consideration the enzyme deficiency. It's very likely that that's going to come back again. So I think thinking of it as like putting together a puzzle and like finding all of those different pieces before you start trying to fix the problem is important. And I think a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah, that might be the story of modern medicine in general. Trying to put a band-aid on a bullet hole and just like hoping it sticks. And then the one thing I think about is like prescriptions, for example. It's like you take a prescription for a symptom and then that causes other symptoms, and then you take a prescription for that symptom, and so on and so on and so on. When in reality, the best way to go forward, like you mentioned, is what's causing the first symptom, and then instead of trying to mask it or fix that with a band-aid, like figuring that out. One question I have for you is, I mean, you've obviously accrued an immense amount of knowledge now. What would be if you could go back and you had yourself as a client now when you went to the emergency room that night? What would be like the first couple steps you would take with yourself?
Yeah, I that's a good question. For me, and I think for a lot of people I've worked with too, is trying to like jump into the deep end right away. So it's like you have this disease you get diagnosed with. So it's like, all right, what are all these expensive like biohacking tools and supplements and protocols I can get on? But before you can start doing that stuff, you have to like figure out like, these things don't just come out of nowhere. So it's probably like from a lifestyle perspective, there's things that are contributing to that. Maybe you don't get good sleep. Maybe you're super stressed out or you're not exercising. From a diet perspective, maybe you're eating processed foods or you're not eating a balanced diet, so you have nutrient deficiencies. before you try to jump into the deep end and do all these like intense protocols and stuff, you have to kind of like hit the low hanging fruit first. So that's one of the things I focus on with a lot of people is they don't, you need like a foundation to work from first. So clean up the diet, like cut out the processed foods, reshape your diet in a way that's going to support what you're trying to do. Try to make changes to your lifestyle, like start getting better sleep, go outside and get sunlight, get movement throughout the day. If you don't focus on those first and you try to just, skip ahead to like step 3 or 4, you're just going to fall back to where you were before. I think that's super important. I struggle with that all the time. I still do that now. Like if I have an issue come up, I just immediately like try to look at it from like a biohacking perspective instead of, wait a minute, maybe I haven't been getting good sleep the last couple of weeks. Maybe that's contributing to it. I think it's important to start there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How important is, you mentioned sun? How important is sun to digestion? Is there any like mechanisms that you're aware of where like vitamin D production or something related to sun directly correlate to digestive efficiency and like effectiveness?
Yeah, I'm not an expert. I know there's a lot of guys like Zaid on Twitter talks a lot about like light environment and Tristan and some of those guys. Definitely not an expert on that. There's some really interesting stuff. Like I've seen red light therapy, people doing like red light therapy on their gut, and that can have positive effects on like microbiome balance and things like that. But kind of directly and indirectly. So what you were saying with like vitamin D, super important for a lot of these different processes that affect your gut health, like supporting your immune system, which has a huge impact on gut health and vice versa. With like the integrity of your gut lining. So you may have heard like leaky gut is a kind of common condition that a lot of people have. If you're deficient in nutrients like vitamin D or zinc or things like that, that can contribute to it. So those I think are some of the kind of like direct effects that it have, but even indirectly, your circadian rhythm, like there's so many functions and processes in the body from hormone production and secretion to muscle function with the muscles that are digesting your food. If you're not, if you kind of wake up in the morning, you immediately go to an office and you're under artificial lighting all day. You maybe go outside for 5 minutes, you go grab lunch, and then you go home and you're under artificial lighting. Your body has no idea what time of the day it is. So circadian rhythm gets disaligned. The hormones and muscles and all these different processes get messed up, which affects your digestive health. So yeah, there's a ton of direct and indirect effects that it has. I think that's, I'd say, one of the 4 like key areas of lifestyle that I focus on because a lot of people overlook that.
What would be the other three that you focus on?
Yeah, so stress, I think probably the most overlooked. And that's something that I really struggled with. Like I said, sunlight, sleep, and then movement. Um, I was the type of person years ago where I would wake up and work out like super intense for an hour, and then I would literally sit the rest of the day and like maybe move to go get water, go to the bathroom, but just sit the rest of the day. That's good to exercise in the morning, but then like you're sitting all day. That's something I think a lot of people struggle with. The sleep, definitely something a lot of people struggle with. I think a lot of people just focus on like I need 8 hours of sleep, but they don't really focus on the quality of that sleep. They're on their phone right before they go to bed or watching TV, getting blasted with these blue lights, and their quality of their sleep is just terrible, which definitely has an effect. I think those are the most important. Not necessarily the most important. I think those are the ones that get overlooked a lot that do have a pretty profound impact on gut health.
So when you go, obviously, I think your handle's like holistic Nick, and listening to you, it's a very holistic approach that you try to implement and that you coach people on. But is that just entirely opposite to the modern medicine system that like if I had gut health, I don't even know what type of doctor I'd go to, but if I went to like a gut doctor, is that like just entirely opposite to what they would most likely tell me?
Yeah, I I ended up like over the years that I dealt with these issues, I ended up going to 6 different healthcare professionals. One of them asked me about my sleep, about like exercise and stress levels and sunlight and stuff like that. She was a functional doctor. The rest of them were just your traditional doctor. the person who diagnosed me with ulcerative colitis literally did not even ask about my diet. He just said, "Here's this medication that will get your inflammation under control." He gave me a pamphlet that went through ulcerative colitis, and in that pamphlet they mentioned like low FODMAP diet, avoid these certain foods and stuff like that. But he didn't mention anything other than this medication. Um,
That's
and
wild.
yeah, I mean, it's even some of them might just kind of touch like surface level. Yeah, you gotta like overall be healthy and sleep and stuff like that, but they don't go into detail on it, which sucks because I think those are for a lot of people the reason they're dealing with these issues is they're not focusing on those things.
Yeah, and they're taught like, okay, I have this issue. I go to the doctor will be able to help me. So a lot of people that don't have the initiative that you have, or that a lot of these people on health Twitter have, they don't. They think that they take it as gospel. They're like, okay, well, the doctor told me to do this, so I guess at some point it's either going to get better or it's not. I guess that's just how it goes. But you're exactly right in that. I mean, I think that's absolutely wild. You got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and the person didn't even talk to you about what you were putting into your body, which is absolutely
Yeah.
wild. But on that note, what actually is ulcerative colitis? I know a couple people that have actually healed it, which is cool. But like, what exactly is that?
So it's an inflammatory bowel disease. There's Crohn's disease and colitis, which are pretty similar. Actually, I've heard of a lot of people who get diagnosed with colitis and then later find out that it actually was Crohn's. Crohn's can affect like different parts of your gastrointestinal tract. Like kind of you could have it towards the end, and then it kind of skips a spot, and then you have some at the beginning of your gastrointestinal tract. Whereas colitis is usually just like one kind of isolated area of that. They're very similar in terms of symptoms, but they're inflammatory conditions. So it's an autoimmune disease. Your immune system is basically like attacking your intestines or attacking different parts of your gastrointestinal tract, which causes this like chronic inflammation levels, damages your gut as well. So there's the same thing with celiac disease is actually pretty similar. It causes inflammation in your body's like attacking itself, which can cause long term, potentially permanent damage to your gut. Um, but it affects like there's so many effects from it. It could affect your stomach acid levels, so you aren't digesting foods as well. It can prevent you from absorbing nutrients the way that you're supposed to, so you get nutrient deficiencies. And then what I was talking about before, like because the immune system is involved and it kind of spreads beyond just your gut. Like I've seen some people have severe joint pain, like to the point where it's almost like they have arthritis, but it's from the IBD. For me, it was like my eyes would hurt a lot and they would get like swollen. It kind of felt like I had the flu basically. Like my whole body was just aching and just always felt tired, like chronic exhaustion, no matter how much sleep I got. Yeah, it's a pretty gnarly condition. It's not fun to deal with. There's different ends of the spectrum. Like some people that have it, it's very manageable. They might have a flare up if they eat something that they shouldn't eat, and then it just kind of goes back under control. I've seen some people that literally have to get like infusions or be on biologic drugs for the rest of their life just to be able to function at like a somewhat normal level. So yeah, it's a pretty crazy condition.
Yeah, that's absolutely wild. And I remember talking to Brett. He was saying that at his worst, he was shitting blood like many times a day. Is that an actual common thing, or is that pretty far
Yeah,
on the
it's
spectrum? I feel
I
like that's pretty intense.
yeah, I had that. I didn't mention that earlier. That was one of the symptoms that day when I went to the emergency room. Like I think like a week and a half or 2 weeks before that, I started noticing that. And to me, it's like one, it's kind of embarrassing. Like I don't want to go to the
Yeah.
doctor right away and be like, "Hey, I've been shitting blood." Um, and then also, I kind of got to the point where it was like scaring me. Like it's been a week and a half, and every time I go to the bathroom, there's blood. So I got to the point where it's like, okay, this is kind of starting to get like really concerning. That's when the pain started setting in. But yeah, like can cause blood, like mucus in your stool. There's some crazy symptoms that can come from it, but that one's pretty common. I'd say majority of people that I've talked to or worked with that have either Crohn's or colitis have that symptom.
It's interesting to hear you say that because it is embarrassing. Like I've never had that happen, but I can't imagine it being. Brett had another good point because he thinks that a lot of at least with UC, a lot of it happens in like early to like 20-year-old men, And he thinks a lot of it has to do with pride, where it's like, for the exact reasons you just mentioned. Like you have this pain and you have these symptoms and you kind of just want to push through. It's like, okay, dude, it'll get better. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I don't want to go to the hospital. I don't want to go to the emergency room. I don't want to go to the doctor and tell him I'm shitting blood and that I can't think and all this stuff until it gets to the point, like for you and for Brett, where he's shitting blood 20 times a day and you have stomach pain so bad you have to go to the emergency room. That's what catalyzes the change for y'all. But so many people like you, before you had that change, so many people have these symptoms or have mild symptoms, but they're not serious enough for them to make the change. What would you tell them? Because like Will Harris, another guy I spoke with, talked about as it relates to food system and processed foods and big farm. He's like, he's 60 something years old. And he's like, at my age, I've realized that pain is the only thing that brings about change. So you hope that you don't have to get to the point that you got to, right? You hope that your clients don't have to get to that point. So what would you tell somebody that has some of these symptoms but it's like, you know what, it is what it is. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's tough. I think about this a lot, like with the content that I post, because I hate when people are like fear mongering and like trying just being negative and like not talking about how to get out of issues, but at the same time, exactly what you're saying, and I agree with what Will said. Like for most people, they're just simply not going to make a change until it gets to the point where they're forced to make a change because they got, maybe they have kids, they have a family, they're busy, they're running a business, whatever it is. Everybody has excuses why they don't want to focus on these things. But yeah, I mean, I think about that a lot. I think just showing people, like, that's originally why I started sharing my story, is to like show people, one, that you can heal naturally, but also two, when you ignore issues like these minor symptoms that I was dealing with for so long, it could end up where you have an autoimmune disease, which is technically something you live with for the rest of your life, and can have like irreversible damage on your body. So, yeah, I think just sharing like my story, sharing stories of like clients I work with, and showing people how bad it really can get, is really the kind of the best you can do. Because I think some people do see that and they internalize that and they think like, wow, he had the same symptoms that I had before, and then it turned into something really serious. And then some people just internalize that. They're like, okay, yeah, let me get on top of this. But for some people, I just think they won't actually do it until it becomes real and they experience it themselves.
Yeah, I had a coach in college talk about there's two types of experience. There's expensive and inexpensive. Expensive is when you have to learn the lesson yourself. Inexpensive is when you learn it from somebody else. And so that'd be a great example. And it's actually funny because like you're a coach, so people would hire you. So that would actually be a financial expense. But in that, it would still be inexpensive experience as it relates to the pain and the long-term effects that could come from delaying that, if that makes sense. It's just one of those things. I think that's like part of the whole appeal to me of living like a holistic lifestyle, as it relates to the four principles that you talked about, like movement, sleep, sun, diet, all these things. When you cover those bases, you're pretty much not negating, but you're minimizing or mitigating the potential for all these long-term effects at like a base level. Like you're covering so many of your bases. Obviously, there's examples of different things happening, but when you cover those fundamental bases, you kind of remove yourself from at least a lot of that expensive experience that you could go through. And so I think that's why it's so valuable to work with a guy like yourself who's preaching those things. And I'm curious because I mean you had a job before this. Did you quit your job and then like immediately go into coaching, or how did that transition happen to you being like a full-time coach?
Yeah, I didn't. I started kind of doing this on the side while I had that job. I Like I said before, like my whole life, I was always interested in health and fitness. And when I was in college, took like elective classes to learn about, like a biology class and different things to try to learn about these things. From at that time, it was more, I'm just interested in it because like I wanted to be like get big and strong, and I want to like hack my way into the best ways to do that. But I always like had this interest. So when this stuff all started, that forced me to not just do this out of interest, but obviously like it kind of felt like my life was on the line because of what I was dealing with. So that I started digging deeper and deeper and deeper and just learned so much throughout that process. And I started just posting online, like posting my story on Twitter, on Instagram. And I would have people reach out and ask questions like, your story is almost identical to mine. And that happened more and more and more. And like tons and tons of people started following me. So I started to realize like, wow, there really is. I honestly did not realize how many people had the specific autoimmune disease I have, but just digestive issues in general. And yeah, it got to the point where it's like so many people reaching out. So I started like just offering up free advice to them and telling them like, these are the things I did. I tried this, I tried that. And then it got to the point where it's like, I really didn't like the career I was in before. I went into it just strictly because it paid well and I wanted to set myself up. I didn't enjoy it at all. And actually, I think the stress, the like cutthroat environment, long hours that came with that contributed to some of the issues that I was dealing with. So the more that this went on and I was helping people and the more I realized I really don't enjoy this career at all, I just was like, you know what, I'm going to try to transition out of this and just help people like full time. So yeah, I was doing that on the side for a while. I had like launched my coaching program, had a few like less than 10 people I was working with. It was going well. They were getting good results. And then, just took the leap of faith eventually and said, I'm going to do this full time, which was awesome because it's, the career I was in before is like just strictly financial focused. You're just helping people, like invest their money and that wasn't rewarding at all to me. And this is like, one, it allows me to be healthier. I'm focusing on my health. I'm doing the things that are important for my health, but also I can make a difference and literally change other people's lives. Like the situation I was in was pretty bad, but some of these people I've worked with have lost like marriages or they've lost, you know, everything. Some people lost their job. They've lost everything that they had in life because of their health issues. So being able to help people in any way and get any results like that is just, it's amazing to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's super cool to hear, honestly, because I think it's just like the food, or like the symptoms. Like we're taught that so many people think that's the norm. Like they're like, oh well, I guess this will go away, or if it doesn't, I'll just have to figure it out. It's kind of like it is what it is. And also, you coming from like a semi-health conscious background too, you think that you're doing the right things, and so since you think you're doing the right things, you think that this is kind of an inescapable consequence. So it's like, well, if I'm already doing the right things, then this must just be how it's supposed to be. One question that I thought of is relates to like UC and other autoimmune disease, uh, especially as they relate to like gut health. Are they genetic, or how do they come to be? Can they be genetic? Can they not be genetic? How do they come to manifest in people's bodies?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's not a lot of great research out there on these conditions or really just like autoimmune conditions in general, I think. With this one, they do think there is like hereditary links, but there's nobody in my family that's ever had this condition, even like undiagnosed. Like nobody has any symptoms even like this at all. Um, so I think maybe it could be, but to me, so when I think about the years that were leading up to getting diagnosed, was had just come out of college like a few years earlier. I was drinking, I was not getting sleep, like I was not living a healthy lifestyle at that point. I get out of college, I'm working long hours. It was definitely a healthier lifestyle, but I still wasn't. I had taken like a financial exam before I got that diagnosis. So it was like 6 months I was studying, working long hours, and then studying like 4 hours each day on top of that. Super stressful environment. And then literally like a month after that exam is when all this stuff started. So it's hard to say whether that caused it or if it is like a hereditary thing or something that I already had and that just kind of triggered it and set it off. I don't really know. But I think based on other stories and hearing other people's situations, I think it is probably a combination of like their diet contributes to it, their lifestyle contributes to it, and maybe they are just like genetically more susceptible to it.
Yeah, I think the lifestyle comment it's got to be, as you mentioned, maybe it's genetic, but like the lifestyle, as you are a living proof of, like your lifestyle can also change it and heal it, to a large degree at least. So I think the lifestyle leading up to it has to play a part. Like even if it is genetic, I bet you like lifestyle accentuates or heals whatever genetic predispositions are there. But I kind of want to go back to the fact that like what you just talked about, how it's so rewarding to coach. I think that's so cool. It's not cool to hear people, as everybody knows, like health is extremely important. And if you don't have health, then you actually, like, you literally don't have anything. Like you just mentioned, people lose their jobs, people lose marriages, people lose everything they have because of their health. They lose their life because they don't have their health. What's the biggest thing you've learned about yourself, like taking that leap from the financial focused sort of career to the career you're in now, where you're like helping people literally change their life? Is there anything like stands out from a personal development uh, perspective?
Yeah, I think it's kind of related to what I was saying before about before you can really like jump into a health protocol to resolve issues, you have to have a solid foundation. I've even after getting my issues under control, like switching from being an employee to having my own business, there's a lot of stress that comes with that. I ended up finding myself in a situation where it's like I'm working long hours again. I'm not prioritizing health as much as I should be. So I kind of slip back into bad habits. Now that I have the knowledge I have, it's pretty easy to like quickly get on top of that. But I think what's super important is having that foundation. Like if I didn't have these principles or this foundation that kind of keeps me in check, it's so easy to slip back into bad habits or get into, like you eat two unhealthy meals and then that third one becomes easier, the fourth one becomes easier. Um, whether it's health related, whether it's career related, whether it's like fitness and aesthetic related, just having foundation, having principles that kind of like guide you in everything you do, I think is so important because if you don't have that, you can find yourself getting pretty lost, for years, and then you turn around, it's like, whoa, what just happened?
Yeah, even the like the idea of you don't know what you don't know. It's like you had this baseline of health that you thought was normal, and then you heal yourself to the point where you're like, holy cow, this is, I can think clearly, my stomach doesn't hurt, I'm not shitting blood, and without like taking a what's the word, taking account or like really taking notice of what those principles that got you to that place are. I feel like that's exactly what you just mentioned. People will just slip back into that thing, and then oh wait, I need to go implement those principles again. And I think that's where a coach comes in handy, actually, like somebody like yourself, because it can help you. It's like constant reminder, constant accountability about those principles. It's like, okay, hey, look, like, are you getting your sleep? Oh, did you've been feeling bad? When's the last time you went and got a lot of sun or went to the beach or moved and all this stuff? So I think that's like one of the benefits of coaching in particular. But from a not financial, entrepreneurial standpoint, obviously, like, I have mad respect for you taking that leap, because that is a hard leap, especially from what it sounds like to be a pretty financially incentivized industry. Like taking the leap to be your own boss and your own sort of, what's the word? Everything falls on you. You used to have a boss where they tell you to do whatever, and now you have to worry about getting clients signed up. Then you have to worry about your actual program. Then you have to worry about actual like coaching. Then you have to worry about marketing, all that stuff. What's the biggest thing you've learned about like entrepreneurship in general from the leap that you've taken?
I think it's what you were kind of just getting at there is like coaching or like more broadly, just continuously learning about things. So whether it's entrepreneurial or health, I'm always still trying to learn new things. From the entrepreneurial side of things, I have worked with several coaches and mentors and people who have just showed me like, hey, this is I was in your shoes before. This is what I did to get to where I am. So I learned something from that person. And then there's another person who has something else that they're an expert in. And I talk to them and learn from them and just continuously like expanding that knowledge. There's there's a lot of people like on social media who are super super successful as entrepreneurs, and you listen to their content, it's like they're always talking about new things. There's like a new topic or a new whatever it is that they're talking about. I think once you get to that point, like at first I was just trying to like keep my head above water, and then when you get to that point where it's like, okay, I'm a little bit comfortable now, I think a lot of people can just stop there. Same thing with health. Like you overcome one issue and then you just kind of like stop and you stagnate there. But going further and just continuously learning, continuously making things better, having that kind of buffer there, I think that's what sets you apart. And that's been super important for me, is just never getting complacent, always trying to learn, always trying to improve things. I'd say that's probably the most important thing for me so far.
That's awesome. It kind of speaks to the ethos of my podcast. Honestly, Tyro means novice or beginner. So it's sort of it speaks to the whole theme of what I'm trying to do and what I think I realize about myself is like I am a novice in so many things. I'm a beginner in literally so many things, but like you have to keep learning. I say this all the time. I hope to die a Tyro. I hope to die not knowing shit about a lot of things and continually trying to learn about those things. One of those things I think, unless I'm mistaken, I think we talked earlier about it, is jujitsu. You just started jujitsu recently.
I so yeah, I was just gonna say that as well. It's like learning new things like that and throwing yourself into because like before I started that or I did Muay Thai as well. I hadn't learned like a new sport or tried something new like that since I was like literally a teenager, and it's amazing to experience that again and be a novice again and have to like crawl your way back up. That's been incredible for me from personal development, physically, mentally. It's probably been one of the best decisions I made is getting into martial arts.
Dude, that's so cool to hear. I 100% relate to that. And I think it's something you just brought up that I didn't really think about before is like people do go like extended periods of time, especially like adult men and women for that matter as well. But like you go to college and you get your major and then you get your job and then it's kind of like an extremely slow upward tick, hopefully upward, of of not really learning an entire new skill or an entire new hobby or an entire new set of knowledge or capabilities. But I mean, you had an example of obviously being an entrepreneur. That's a pretty stark leap. That's a pretty big leap to take. But then jujitsu is like tell people this all the time. It's the most dumb I've ever felt in my life. When I walked into jujitsu for the first time, dude, I'm like, holy shit, I don't know anything. Like, because most of the time, think about it. Like, you go into say, oh, I'm gonna start lifting a little bit more. I'm gonna do a different style of lifting. Okay, well, you've at least lifted weights before. I'm gonna play basketball more seriously. Okay, well, you've at least shot a basketball before, and so on and so forth. But never in my life have I ever basically hugged another dude that's stronger than me and tried to choke him out while he tries to choke me out or tries to like rip my leg off and stuff. It's just I think jujitsu particularly for me, that was my first martial art, so I'm biased. I have done Muay Thai as well, but jujitsu as it relates to like the cerebral effect too, it's so it's like the way I've always referred to it as is human chess. It's like it's literally
Yeah.
chess, except the opponent isn't trying to move a king. He's trying to literally stop blood from coming to your brain.
Yeah, the carryover from that alone, because I think like when you're like around the age we're at, you're whether you're building a business, whatever it is, you want to like make yourself feel good. You want to boost your ego, like you want to have confidence in yourself. You step into a martial arts gym, it's like that's gone. There's a guy a third of your size who turns you into a pretzel, and it forced me to like just rethink things. Like now, instead of avoiding that discomfort and trying to boost my confidence at all times, it's like now I want to seek out things like that. I want to try new martial arts. There's called capoeira. It's like a Brazilian martial art. The Muay Thai gym that I go to, they do that there. And now it's like I just want to add as many pieces to the board as possible and learn as many new skills and things as I can because it's physically it's amazing. You get in great shape. Mentally, it's amazing because it's like chess, like you're saying. You have to I can tell I'm using different parts of my brain when I do things like that than when I'm working or anything else. Like it just works these different areas of your life that you don't typically use. It's amazing. I've seen improvements across every aspect of my life since I started doing these things.
Many such cases, man. I've talked to so many people with that exact same takeaway. It's like it literally changes your life. I feel like there's two. I like remember myself, especially physically. You're so right. It's like, what do I think about when I'm in the gym? What do I train for when I'm in the gym? Or even what do I focus on physically has changed completely because I think about it in the context of Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu. Like, oh, would this help me in a fight? As opposed to like, is this going to help me look good? I think one of my things I tweeted about this recently. When you train for athleticism, mobility, and strength, the aesthetics will come over a long enough time horizon. Like it's impossible for you to train those three things consistently and take care of the other things holistically as it relates to health, and you not become like an aesthetic, or not to gain aesthetic physique, in my opinion. But you, we kind of just talked about movement and training. Something I just thought about. How important is, or is there any like direct correlation to physical training, like a specific type of physical training, maybe lifting, martial arts, or like walking in general, how important are those, or is there like a specific mechanism by which those affect digestion as well?
Yeah, I think kind of at like a basic level, like I was saying before, just engaging these like muscles and organs that are involved in your digestion can help support digestion, motility, and things like that. Um, there are deeper, so like if you're doing like intense exercise, your body can produce something called beta hydroxybutyrate, which can help with conditions like if you have leaky gut, it can help kind of repair damaged tissues in the body. There's benefits like that. I'm not definitely not an expert on the nitty gritty of that, but yeah, I mean, just more broadly, I think the movement, like engaging your body throughout the day, helps with the digestion for sure. When you're engaging those different muscles.
What's like a so say somebody works that job like similar to what you used to work, where you're kind of they're working out in the morning or in the evening, but they're sitting still for the most part in the day. What would be your recommended movement protocol? Like, hey, get up and do X, Y, and Z. What would that look like throughout a day?
Yeah, I have these like these exercise bands. I think I picked this up from Noah Ryan, but I keep these like I'm always just stretching, or I'll stand up and do like some air squats, or um, like whatever it is, just kind of get up and take breaks throughout the day. Standing desk I think is super helpful instead of just literally being in this like unnatural sitting position all day. Um, yeah, and then also this this helped me with the movement thing. I used to like sit down and just work. I didn't have a choice, but like I would have to just sit at this desk and work for like 8 hours a day. I was never productive. I would notice like after 2 hours of doing that, I'm losing focus. My brain isn't firing at 100%. Something I did more recently, like now that I have the ability to do it, is sit down for work intensely for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, take a break, 30 minutes, like go for a walk, go outside, get sunlight, stretch, whatever it is you want to do, then come back down, sit down, and work again. When I do that, it helps me get that movement, but I'm also like completely taking my mind off of whatever it was that I was doing. So when I sit down, it's like fresh mind again, focus, concentration, all of these things are ready to go. That's helped from the movement and like the mental perspective.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a. I'm gonna botch like the numbers and the but the general gist is on point. Huberman talks about something where if you can view like an open landscape every so often, I think the number he said was like 45 minutes to an hour or something, your focus increases. And the way that I think about it is you think about hunting and gathering. Hunting and gathering really is like you go from periods of like vague vision and then you zero in super focus on an animal, and then you're pursuing that animal, kind of like the deep work sessions that you're talking about, and then you zoom out again and you're like looking at, okay, now I'm gonna go gather, like looking for mushrooms, and you super focus. So that's been really helpful for me because I sort of structure mine, or at least I try to structure my days in the same way, where I'll do like intense work and then I'll just try to step away instead of like just trying to, what's the word, kind of just like get through it. I find that my productivity is actually way lower. But specifically for somebody, I mean, I guess somebody in an office could pull out a band and maybe run the risk of getting like made fun of from their colleagues and stuff. But like if somebody's in an office, they go to like a downtown office and they work there all day, what would be some stuff for them? Just like go for a lunch break, or I mean, I guess they could bring a band if they really wanted to.
Yeah, I had to struggle through that as well. Eventually, I got to the point where I was just like, I don't care if anybody thinks I'm weird. I was also like taking my shoes off and standing in like the grass behind the office, and definitely got some weird looks from that too. But yeah, I mean, something I did is my when I first started trying to do these things, I thought like, especially in the environment I was in, it's like cutthroat. Everybody's competing. You have to like, if you're not at your desk, it's like, where the hell is this guy? But what I started doing is breaking things up, like I said, and trying to go outside and like literally walk around the building, or stay inside and like go up and down the stairs. It's like a 5 minute break, do that, and then come back and sit down and work. Nobody's gonna notice or say anything if you're gone for like 5 minutes. You could just say I'm at the bathroom, or I want to go get water or something. Those add up though. I would At the time I was wearing one of the like fitness tracker things. My step count was like going through the roof just simply doing that. Like go down the stairs, come back up, sit back down to my desk. Those kinds of things work because like nobody's seeing you do that. Like you're not exercising at your desk, allows you to get some of that movement. But eventually, when you can break through the mental barrier there, I think just doing like doing squats at your desk or something like that, and just not caring what people think.
Yeah, I think that's valid. Like, I've always been one person to. I would literally be the person like barefoot with toe spacers and doing air squats at like an office. That's just kind of how I've been. But I think there's so much merit to that because you're exactly right. Step count is a good proxy generally for movement throughout a day. And one thing, have you seen like these what are they called? Just like treadmills, like that people put under their desks. Have you seen these?
Yeah, I have a friend of mine is he's in like a office job. He has I think it's either a treadmill or like a one of the bike things that he has under there. But yeah, those are pretty interesting.
Dude, I mean, my brother's wife, so my sister-in-law, just got one, and my initial thought was like, okay, well, you don't want this. I don't think it should replace going outside and actually getting a real walk. But that being said, if there's like some shallow work, like responding to emails or something that you can do, my brother's even told me he'll just like after work and him and his wife will put on a show and he'll just get a couple thousand steps. And I'm like, that's actually that's really smart though, in my opinion. I think that's a really simple way. And actually, I think the one that they got is only a few $100, which is, I mean, at some point there's a high percent chance I get one because I think that would be. I just think it's an easy way to do what you were just talking about, like just stack them up throughout the day. It doesn't have to be like 1 2 hour period. It's literally just every 90 minutes, go get a 5 minute stair session where you walk up and down the stairs and stuff like that, which I think is extremely valuable. One
Yeah.
thing that I'm curious about, like for myself, I don't have gut issues that I know of. I don't have any of the symptoms that you're referring to. I'm not shitting blood, which I consider myself grateful for. Um, but like what should I be focused on still? Like what are some things that I can do as somebody who doesn't have any symptoms but still wants to maintain like proper gut health? What do you think that I should be focusing on?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just like not there's periods where these like extreme like we were talking about before, like a carnivore diet, people are dealing with like acute issues that need to be addressed. I think going through an elimination diet could be helpful. Or if there's periods of your life, like you're training for something, you want to go low carb and train for that, or whatever it is, like you want to make these adjustments to your diet. But I think the biggest thing is when you're not dealing with issues, when you're not training for something or going through like a unique situation, just having like a balanced diet where you're getting all the nutrients you need, where you're not getting like excessive amounts of carbohydrates or you're not getting enough fats or something like that in your diet. I think having that balance is super important from the diet perspective, the lifestyle, like we talked about, the sleep, the sunlight, the stress, all that stuff, which, I know you're on top of all that stuff, but yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. And more so on the side of like avoiding issues is one mistake I think a lot of people make is they just take I fall into this as well. Like the methylene blue I was drinking a minute ago. I still take supplements like that because I want like the cognitive enhancement or if I'll have like nicotine or something like that here and there. I still do those things. But
I'm
I
zenned
think
up right
some
now.
people get to the point. Yeah. I think some people get to the point where it's like they have 6 or 7 supplements they're taking on a daily basis. They like become dependent on that. That's a problem. But also, there's when you look at these supplement labels, there's so many other ingredients in there, silicon dioxide, like all kinds of things that could potentially lead to issues, especially if you're taking like 5, 6, 7 supplements a day for extended periods of time. That's something I think a lot of people kind of mess up, and eventually that starts to lead to some issues for them.
That's great advice. That's not something I thought about either because you think about, okay, this supplement has one ingredient that I'm not cool with, whatever, and then like you said, you multiply that by 5 10 supplements a day every day of the week. That could definitely add up and become a nuisance to say the least. Well, another thing that I was thinking about is, do you work with women as well?
Yep. It's
Is
mostly, I think, just obviously because I'm a man, mostly men reach out to me. But yeah, we have had a few women.
Are you aware of any similarities or differences that you've seen between like the gut health protocols or I guess like health issues that women and men face?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like the women we've worked with, the issues that they've been dealing with. It's not like they're completely different than like what the men are dealing with, but there's more. There's differences between the way like women structure their diet, or obviously like when we're talking about exercise, it's going to be a little bit different for a guy who's 6'3", like 200 pounds, than a woman who's like 5'7". And then also like hormonal differences. There's definitely some nuance there that you have to take into consideration. But even not necessarily just like men and women. Even if you have two males that I'm working with, one guy is like I said 6'3", 200 pounds. The other guy is like 5'10". One guy works a desk job. The other guy is like a fitness trainer or something like that. There's nuance to everybody's situation. There's like bio individuality. There's your body requires a different amount of certain nutrients than my body requires, or your body handles certain things differently than my body does. So I think that's important, is understanding that, having that differentiation, and not trying to just like copy and paste the same exact recommendations for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think that this is one of the things that the modern medicine system gets wrong in many ways is the lack of acknowledgement of bio individuality. It's kind of just like a blanket. Here you go. This is what we give to everybody that has this issue. It should help. We'll see. Whereas you're exactly right. Even two guys that work similar jobs and have similar frames probably can have drastically different experiences with different protocols. So that makes a lot of sense. I asked Dr. Bill Schindler this same question, and his answer was pretty funny to me. But I want to get your answer as well. Is there any foods that you just avoid, like religiously, that you're like very stern on? That okay, I'm not putting this in my body.
Yeah, I'm not as. For a while, I was like just crazy about certain things because like I was dealing with a lot of things, and when I finally got to the point where those were gone, it's like, okay, I will never go back to that point again. So I was very, very, very strict. I've built up like resiliency, and I have a good enough knowledge base where I don't have to be as crazy about those things. Like if I go to somebody's house and they cook something, I don't need to be like, hey, did you cook, like, is there vegetable oil in here? I still, those things, so it would be like the seed oils, or like gluten, like I said before. That's something I still try to avoid completely or just limit significantly. Um, Really, any kind of like processed packaged food that has a bunch of different ingredients in there. Those are really the main things I try to avoid. Like alcohol and stuff like that too. I'll still have also have wine and drinks here and there, but those are kind of the main things that I know is a slippery slope. Like if I start eating a lot of gluten, I'm going to start to feel that. If I'm drinking alcohol like all the time, I'm definitely going to start to feel that. But outside of that, like there's foods like nuts and seeds or something that before was causing all kinds of issues. I can tolerate those now, but if I'm eating those like every single day, that can start to lead to some of those like inflammation issues I was dealing with. Um, Coffee's another one. Like before, I couldn't tolerate that at all. I can have that now. I love espresso. I'll still have that, but if I have that like multiple, like 2 3 weeks in a row every single day, the acidity in there, like I definitely start to feel that a little bit. So um, it's kind of like a meme at this point, but everybody talks about it. Like just sticking to the whole foods. As long as you do that, I think you're pretty safe. Like there's obviously going to be some foods that if you have too much of them, they can cause issues. But if you have a solid base and you're really just like sticking to those whole foods instead of foods with ingredient labels, it makes it much harder to go wrong there.
Yeah, the ingredient labels are something that I think that's like a great entry point to for people that don't really care about food. Just I encourage people just like to go look at ingredients. Like, hey, you're eating food from the grocery store that's processed. Just start taking note of the fact that there's 25 ingredients in a singular food, and then just go down that rabbit hole is funny. But one thing you mentioned that I think is so important, and it kind of stems to one thing I got from Noah Ryan as well, which is resilience, not neuroticism, and the idea that like different circumstances require different measures. So you were in one point where you were literally shitting blood, like you hadn't go to the hospital because your pain was so bad, um, and that's going to obviously require you to take more severe steps and be more strict and stringent with your protocols. But now you've gotten to a point where you can be more resilient and you can tolerate the couple espressos, whatever, the seeds, the nuts, or the seed oils every once in a while. I'm similar in that way. I think I get to sometimes I get a little neurotic about it, where I'm like, okay, just chill out. Like you're not gonna die. You have a pretty physiological. You're pretty robust physiologically, so it's like you can tolerate a seed oil meal. But you mentioned coffee. Is How bad is coffee on an empty stomach? Is that a real thing?
I can't point to like a specific study where it shows the difference between like coffee consumption on an empty stomach versus coffee consumption when you have food or other things in your body. Purely like anecdotally myself and with a lot of other people I've worked with, like the symptoms, the negative effects that can come from coffee seem to be more pronounced when it's on an empty stomach. So like for me, I would get, if I had it on an empty stomach, I would get like intense reflux. Or when I was dealing with bloating, if I would have that on an empty stomach, I would really notice that, like significantly more than if I had breakfast. If I ate like some eggs or some fruit and then I had some coffee, those the symptoms, like the effects from that, were not. I still felt it, but it wasn't anywhere near as much as on an empty stomach. Um, the negative effect, I think, there's a few different things, like the quality. It's just like with any other food, but the quality of the coffee is super important. So I think a lot of them, if you just go to the grocery store and get like Folgers or like one of the main brands that you see there, they are prone to mold and mycotoxins and things like that in them. A lot of them are very acidic, which can be irritating. So if it's like a high quality, some of them are lower acidity, like organic coffee, I think a lot of people would do fine with that. But some of those lower quality ones, I think, are just more susceptible to having things like mold in there that can definitely worsen the effects that they have on you.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear because I to speak to the bio individuality and stuff. I drink coffee on an empty stomach a good bit. I don't know. I don't know if I've experienced anything. I guess I don't have enough like data where I haven't really focused on it enough over long term to actually make that like to decide whether or not it's actually bad for me. But I have heard that a lot of people have experienced, like they've been just drinking a cup of coffee before they eat, and then literally something as simple as just eating something before they do that, and then they've experienced a lot of benefits from doing that. So, and what about cold brew? Do you know, like, my brother's big into cold brew over hot coffee. Is that something that's worth looking into? I think like the acidity is supposed to be lower in cold brew. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I haven't really dabbled too. I've always been an espresso person. I haven't dug too much into coffee. I have heard that though, that it's there's a difference in the acidity there, which I think for a lot of people would make a difference for them if they're dealing with issues from it. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's also higher in. I believe it's higher in caffeine than like a normal coffee, or maybe I'm thinking of like the nitro cold brew. But I think the caffeine itself, like there are some people when they have caffeine, it can cause like diarrhea or like bowel movement changes. Um, Even if it's like tea, if they have like yerba mate, which has caffeine in there, they still get a reaction to that. So that's another factor as well. It might not just be the coffee itself; it can be like a reaction to the caffeine.
Interesting. Yeah, that's because acidity is something you obviously want to be focusing on, and that's something that I've always thought about. I didn't know if my brother was full of shit or not, so it's just, I'll have to do a little more research on that. But we're pushing the hour 15 mark, and let's see. I think it 3:49. About to get in the woods here soon, but I got a question for you, man. I've been asking some people this. I think it's an interesting dive into like to you as a person and also the message that you're trying to get out. But if you could write a tweet that everybody in the world would see, what would you write?
That's a good one.
And you can take your time.
Honestly, I think it would be kind of like a good summary to everything we were talking about. Um, I don't know how I would word it, but basically, like, don't ever just accept like what's considered normal or like this is the truth. Like when it came to my career, it's like you go to college, you study, you get a job, you slowly work your way up the corporate ladder. That's how you go about life. With health, it's like I have a health issue, I go to a doctor, I listen to them, I take medication. That's what you do. Diet, you just the mainstream narrative is like eat all these processed foods, all this stuff's good for you, saturated fats, red meat's bad for you. The more that I listened to those things, the less happy and the less healthy, the less successful I was. The more that I started to question those things and try some of the things that were considered like way out there, or you can't eat a carnivore diet, you're going to die. Like that's super unhealthy. The more that I like pushed those boundaries, quitting a comfortable job and starting a new business on my own when I had never done that before, the more that I did that, the better I felt, the more happy I was in life, the more successful I became in life. And I think that's for everybody. I think it's important to just never accept like what you're told is true and always figure out on your own. Even if you go through that process and you figure out like, okay, you know what, they were right. I'm not made to be an entrepreneur. At least you like went through that. You learned that firsthand. Probably learned a lot of stuff along the way. I think it's super important to never just accept that and always figure things out on your own.
That's awesome, dude. That'd be a hell of a thread.
It's a good idea. I might have to do that.
Yeah. Well, actually, you just brought something up I want to touch on real quick. You're moving out of the country here soon. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm early next year. I'm gonna be moving to Brazil for a while.
Dude, that sounds so epic. Are you gonna be like in a beach in a city? Where are you gonna be?
Yeah, I've never been there before, so I want to see everything. So we'll do like, yeah, we'll probably do like a month in each place. Some of them are like very remote beach towns, but we'll also go to like Rio, like some of the bigger cities, and get to see that stuff. But yeah, I like going through that, like having seasons or phases where it's like I'm really focused. Like right now, I'm living in a city. I'm really focused, like on business and career and all that. And then, I'll take a couple months off and then I'll kind of relax a little bit, spend more time out in nature. So I'll probably kind of follow that same trend while we're over there.
That's epic, dude. You gotta get into some jujitsu gyms there. That's a necessity.
I've heard the gym we go to here. He was saying they're all from Brazil, and he was saying here it's more technical. There it's more like they still have like the technical skills and all that, but he said it's more like brute force over there. So it's not going to be as like technical. They're just going to be trying to like pound your face in.
Well, dude, that's like the origin is Brazil, so I think that'd be super cool. That's something I want to do at some point is go there and just train with, like, obviously maybe not like a legit Gracie or somebody, but like somebody that's associated with the origins of jiu-jitsu. I think would be incredible. And I've heard Brazilian beach towns are pretty damn cool, so I'm sure you'll crush that. But Nick, I appreciate your time, man. This has been awesome. I took notes. I'm gonna go do some research on gut health and what I can do to like keep myself healthy. But I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, for sure, man. I appreciate the invite. This was fun.
Absolutely, brother.